Xin kính chào quý vị và các bạn. Quý vị và các bạn thân mến, Luật Lâm nghiệp 2017 vừa được Quốc hội thông qua đã có một điểm rất là quan trọng khi coi cộng đồng dân cư là chủ rừng. Điều này có nghĩa là cộng đồng dân cư sẽ được tăng thêm quyền cũng như là trách nhiệm của mình. Và để hiểu rõ hơn vai trò của cộng đồng dân cư trong công tác quản lý bảo vệ rừng, trong chương trình Vấn đề môi trường ngày hôm nay thì chúng tôi đã mời một chuyên gia đến từ Tổ chức Nghiên cứu Lâm nghiệp Quốc tế CIFOR, bà Moira Moliono. Xin cảm ơn bà đã tham dự chương trình của chúng tôi. Thưa bà có thể cho biết là Tổ chức Nghiên cứu Lâm nghiệp Quốc tế CIFOR đã có rất nhiều những cái nghiên cứu đánh giá về công tác bảo vệ, quản lý rừng của Việt Nam. Vậy thì bà đánh giá như thế nào về hiện trạng rừng của Việt Nam hiện nay?
Okay, so in the scheme of comparing to ASEAN countries, Vietnam is a country which has actually increased its forest cover. There was a time when deforestation was very high, but that has been reduced, and now forest cover is increasing. However, if you go on these field trips, what you see is actually mostly acacia and eucalyptus, which is good for covering the land, but not so much good for biodiversity. So also the natural forest is still decreasing, and in order to protect natural forest, still Vietnam does need its wood, so it often comes at the cost of neighboring countries like Laos and Cambodia, so we cannot look only at Vietnam, but we have to look at the larger landscape of these countries. But overall, I think forest policies are in place. People are participating more or less. There is a consciousness on the importance of forestry, which is good.
Yeah. Tức là trong cái quá trình mà tham gia bảo vệ rừng ở Việt Nam thì có rất là nhiều thành phần tham gia, trong đó không thể thiếu được cái vai trò của cộng đồng dân cư. Điều đó có nghĩa là cái vai trò của cộng đồng dân cư này rất là lớn, đúng không ạ? Bà nghĩ như thế nào về vai trò của cộng đồng dân cư trong công tác bảo vệ rừng?
So in all these ASEAN countries, Vietnam is not excluded. There is no forest that is empty of people. People do live in and around countries, in all these countries. And so you cannot do forest management or forest protection without considering all these people. And while some are less dependent on forest and others more, like lots of people here are not so much dependent on forest. There are people that very much depend on forest. So in order to understand the role and how much you can actually ask the forest communities, we really should understand the relation of all these different groups towards the forest. So for example, with the forest land allocation, you have people that are required to plant acacia in their countries. So they earn money from the acacia, but then there are people, ethnic communities who are more dependent on non-timber forest products. So you cannot treat them the same because their relation to the forest is not the same. But without them, you cannot protect the forest and you cannot manage the forest sustainably. They are actually the key.
Vâng, thưa bà, có thể thấy rằng là trong Luật Lâm nghiệp 2017 của Việt Nam thì đã công nhận cộng đồng dân cư là chủ rừng. Vậy thì theo quan điểm cá nhân của bà có thể chia sẻ làm thế nào để chúng ta có thể phát huy cũng như là giúp cho cộng đồng dân cư có thể thực hiện tốt được cái quyền làm chủ rừng của mình?
A long time, from colonial times, forests are actually always contested and people have had no rights. And in these last, I think it's 4 decades, the governments are finally realizing that without giving rights, you cannot ask the people to fulfill their responsibilities. Now, Vietnam has always been put as an example to Indonesia because of the forest land allocation program. So for a long time, the NGOs mainly in Indonesia who were striving to get rights of forest people recognized were looking to Vietnam and said, in Vietnam, there is the forest land allocation. Now in Indonesia, there is this big forest land tenure reform, and the government is giving rights more or less along the lines of the forest land allocation. But basically it's not really giving rights, it's giving permits to use the forest. It's not acknowledging the basic rights of these people. So in some cases, people do not really demand property rights. What they want is the right to make a living of forest and the right to make a living well. So they want to be treated as mature citizens of the country, not like the poor forest-dependent people in the highlands, not like ethnic minorities which have no voice. So they want the recognition that they are there, that they do have rights to the forest. And if you acknowledge the rights, then you can talk of what the government can ask them to do, because if they want to be recognized as citizens, they also have to have the responsibility of citizens. And in Indonesia, this discussion is not yet at that stage. So although, like in Vietnam, the requirement is that people will protect the forest, will plant forest, but there is no monitoring and there is no real support to enable the people to do this. So while in Vietnam there are these support for, I think it's seedlings and stuff, and there is a forest extension work. In Indonesia that's not the case yet, but we are going there, looking at this. So basically, if you want to have people responsible to protect the forest, to do sustainable forest management, you do have to recognize their rights. And in recognizing their rights, you can talk to them on an equal basis to negotiate what is expected from the local people and what is expected from the government.
Vâng, thưa bà, hiện nay thì cộng đồng dân cư sống ở khu vực gần rừng núi của Việt Nam là khoảng 20 triệu dân, nhưng mà trong đó thì đến 60% là các cái hộ nghèo. Vậy thì làm thế nào để chúng ta có thể tạo được một cái sinh kế bền vững để giúp cho các cái cộng đồng dân cư sống ở quanh cái khu vực rừng núi này có thể ổn định cũng như là tham gia tốt vào công tác quản lý bảo vệ rừng?
Yes, that's the question that we are still struggling with in our own research, because it has to be realized that people living around the forest are poor, and that putting more responsibility on them to protect the forest is not the way to enrich them and not the way to make the forest sustainable. So, but I also think that in order for the forest to be protected, social forestry is not enough. There should be other infrastructures in place. There should be other opportunities. The local people should be enabled to also seek other jobs if possible. And it's not only to migrate them, because that is also not the question, because however many you migrate out, there is still a lot of people left. So basically we have to look at the whole economic structure, the whole political economic structure, in order to help people in the forest. We shouldn't look only at the local people and the local forest, but we also should look at the economic structure. We should look at the infrastructure. We should look at how local people can gain access to not only land for their cropping, but also for money, and to invest, for information, so that they know what to buy and what to sell, and also for education, so that they will be able to lift themselves out of poverty. But it's not enough to only focus on forest and forest-dependent people. So the policies should, there should be a higher policy, and this lower policy on the forest is only one part of the overall picture.
Vâng, như quan điểm bà vừa chia sẻ thì cái việc mà cộng đồng dân cư tham gia bảo vệ rừng cần có một cái chính sách để phát triển kinh tế xã hội ổn định. Điều đó không chỉ phụ thuộc vào trong các cái chính sách của ngành lâm nghiệp, mà đòi hỏi chính sách quy hoạch sự phát triển kinh tế của cả một vùng cũng như là của một tỉnh có rừng, đúng không ạ? Vâng, theo tôi được biết thì Việt Nam hiện nay đang chủ trương xã hội hóa nghề rừng. Điều này đã tạo thêm sức mạnh cho công tác quản lý cũng như là bảo vệ rừng, góp phần ổn định đời sống của người dân. Và hiện nay thì Việt Nam cũng đang triển khai chính sách chi trả dịch vụ môi trường, cũng như là chương trình giảm phát thải do phá rừng cũng như là suy thoái rừng, hay là chương trình tăng cường thực thi lâm nghiệp quản trị cũng như là buôn bán gỗ FLEGT. Bà có thể chia sẻ những cái quan điểm của bà về vấn đề này như thế nào?
for local communities to be involved in these much larger structures, there is one important thing, which is what is the benefit? People will be motivated if the benefit is attractive enough. And with benefit, I do not mean cash in hand. It might be that it also means access, maybe a road or a school or better health services. So if the benefit for local people to protect the forest is significant enough, they will probably be willing to help in protecting the forest. Secondly, we talked about rights, and the right is also the right to protect the forest from being encroached by other people. So now, if you are a local people, you might be able to protect your people against other local people, but often you cannot protect it against big hydropower or other large-scale industry or conversion to rubber plantation. So unless you give the rights to local people and also the rights to reject these large-scale initiatives, then you cannot have the local people willing to protect the forest, because they say, what for? If I put all my energy in protecting the forest, and then suddenly there is this big company coming and taking it all away. So first of all, it's benefits, and also the power to protect the forest against these larger initiative. But of course, larger initiative might be necessary for the country. So in that case, there should be some negotiation. So you should talk to the people. There should be the free prior informed consent process, and with free prior informed consent, it's really informed consent, not just informing and then assuming consent. So there should be local people should be heard, their voice, and they should be listened to in order for them to be willing to help the government in protecting the forest.
Vâng, thưa bà, vậy thì trong cái quá trình mà thực hiện cũng như là thực hiện các cái chương trình chính sách liên quan đến bảo vệ rừng, vậy thì cái lợi ích mà người dân của cái cộng đồng dân cư đấy khi mà tham gia vào các cái chương trình như là dịch vụ môi trường rừng hay là giảm phát thải do suy thoái rừng cũng như là mất rừng như vậy, thì liệu cái lợi ích mà cộng đồng dân cư họ nhận được thì có nhiều và như là cái cách mà người ta kỳ vọng hay không?
So that was the biggest disappointment in all these schemes, because expectations were really high, and I think the government also thought that it would be sufficient. But in the practice, it turned out that it was much too low to be significant, and that is the biggest disappointment. And like I said, if the benefits are not significant enough and they don't have meaning, people lose interest. It has to be in their interest, and it has to be sufficient. So, but we also know that benefits do not always have to be cash benefits. There might be other benefits. So in Indonesia, for example, one of the benefits that people get is recognition to their forest. So a lot of customary communities, they have protected their forest for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so one of the benefits is now that they get official recognition from the state that this forest is indeed their forest. And that is, in that case, that is sufficient benefits. In Vietnam, we looked at the PFAS, mainly the PFAS, and we discovered that the money value is much, much too low. And I don't know whether that is because the companies do not pay enough or that it's distributed over too many people. But because it is so low, people have lost their interest. So either increase the benefits or try to find another mechanism which fulfills people's hopes or aspirations or wishes. Not that always wishes of the local people should be followed, because sometimes they're also not realistic. But still, if you just negotiate with them, you might get much more progress than ordering them. Command and control is passé.
Yeah. Tôi được biết là Tổ chức Nghiên cứu Lâm nghiệp Quốc tế CIFOR đã có rất nhiều những cái nghiên cứu cũng như là đánh giá về chính sách chi trả dịch vụ môi trường rừng của Việt Nam. Vậy thì bà có thể chia sẻ những cái nhận định của tổ chức cũng như là về cái chính sách này, những cái điểm mạnh của chính sách này đang đem lại cho cộng đồng dân cư, cũng như là những cái điểm mà chúng ta đang cần phải khắc phục để giúp cho cộng đồng dân cư có thể bảo vệ tốt hơn rừng của mình.
So basically, that she said that like she know and she's aware that CIFOR carry out many studies on PFAS, and based on our research finding, can you also just summarize or highlight some of the key feature in terms of the strength of the PFAS program, and also highlight some of the key, some of the key gap in terms of policy that need to be improved to support the local communities better?
Basically, the highlights were, first of all, that that the companies do not always fulfill their obligation, and there is no mechanism in place to force them to do that. So there is no, I don't know if there's a policy or rule, but if there is, it's not monitored. So they often do not fulfill their obligations, so that is also one reason why there is not enough money in the pot. Secondly, I think the research found that some people wish to have it distributed equally, and this is dependent on how social capital in one community is. If the social capital is strong, then they are willing to have the money used for public infrastructure. If they don't trust their leaders, then they would rather have the money in hand, even though it's very small. But that is also the problem with the policy, is that it has always to be equal. Yeah? Citizens have to be treated equal, but we also know that citizens are not equal, and in many communities they have their own rules. And so again, we need to understand more what is actually happening in these communities and how their relation is not only with their leaders but also with the forest. Because for some communities which work on paddy land, for example, forest is not that important. But for other local people who are still doing Sweden, the forest and its patches and its fallow are a big part of their life. And so the benefits should really compensate for those things. So the benefits for people that have already paddy fields must be different from the people that still do dry land agriculture in Sweden. So basically, I think that is all I remember at the moment, because there was a lot of work done in that. But it's also, one other thing is that mechanisms for distribution might also be adjusted to local situations, not make it one uniform approach. Which it makes it more difficult for the government, and so the government often has no manpower to share to do this, but that is why we have researchers, so to provide this input on what is really happening. I know the government has difficulty in issuing policies that apply only to a small segment of population, but perhaps the policies themselves could be more flexible and adjustable at the local level. And then there is this whole issue of discretionary power. So there's a basic policy, but the way it is to be implemented is really within the boundaries of the law, can be left up to local government officials and local people.
Vâng, thưa bà, thực tế thì trong cái công tác bảo vệ rừng ở Việt Nam thì các cái cộng đồng dân cư đã tham gia vào việc bảo vệ rừng cũng khá là lâu rồi. Tuy nhiên thì khi mà có chính sách về lâm nghiệp giúp họ bảo vệ và phát triển rừng tốt hơn, tuy nhiên thì cũng có một bộ phận nhỏ thì họ lại quên đi cái việc là chúng ta cần bảo vệ rừng. Vậy thì làm thế nào để chúng ta có thể tăng cường thêm cái tính tự chủ trong công tác bảo vệ rừng của các cộng đồng dân cư, và chính sách của Việt Nam thì cũng nên cần có những cái hoạt động như thế nào để có thể thúc đẩy thêm cái quyền tự chủ của họ?
The big question, yeah, because we always are playing with historical reasons, yeah. So first of all, there is the state, and it sort of has citizens who have to follow the rule. But often, before the state was very strong, local communities were self-help. They were independent, autonomous. But then, because they were united in the state, now they are having to listen to the state, and the state started to slowly break apart the autonomy of local people And so now we have these people who feel helpless if the state doesn't help them. So now we have to put back their independence, their pride in doing it themselves, and which is all discussed under the heading empowerment. But empowerment also needs to, there's a lot of learning, education, there's a lot of talking, there's a lot of facilitating with local communities. So in a lot of earlier CIFOR work in Indonesia, that was exactly the issue. How do you work with local communities and make them realize that there's a lot of things you can do by yourself? And it takes a long time, I think 20 years of talking, and now a few communities sort of emerge that are doing it themselves. Mm-hmm. So the state also should be a little patient and should enable it. So it should not repress initiative, but it should see if it's still within the framework of the law, if it doesn't break the law, but it's actually to the good of local people, there should be some freedom in doing these things. And it's probably a bit fake, but in Indonesia, for example, there are customary communities who have nothing to do with the state, basically, because they are so remote. So they basically have to organize themselves, to build the roads themselves, to organize schooling themselves. And only after they are successful, suddenly the state say, hey, these people are successful in what they are doing, so we should help them. So sometimes it's a back and forth thing. So if they are not noticed, they're forgotten. So in order to get noticed, they have to do it something themselves. But it takes extra effort, it takes extra facilitation, and it takes the government to enable these initiatives. And sometimes it's difficult for governments to allow that, because then they think they are not government.
Vâng, thưa bà, tôi được biết là Indonesia cũng là một đất nước có diện tích rừng rất là lớn, và ở Indonesia thì cũng đã thực hiện cái chương trình về RED cộng. Vậy thì bà có thể chia sẻ những cái kinh nghiệm của Indonesia trong quá trình thực hiện chương trình về RED cộng như thế nào?
So RED in Indonesia, of course, started about the same time as in Vietnam, but there is up to now no actual implementation in the field, just some research and some experiments and some pilots and some private initiatives. So RED on its own as a government policy has not been implemented at the local level. People in Indonesia are now much more focused on social forestry, and although up to now tenure, social forestry and RED sort of go parallel, there are no efforts to link them. So the social forestry is also aimed to improve mitigation and adaptation, and perhaps also RED, but it's not explicitly said, unlike in Myanmar, for example, where village forestry is explicitly linked to the REDD initiative. So social forestry is big now. The target is very, very big, and the pace is very fast. So while before it was very slow, suddenly now, in order to fulfill the target of 12.7 million hectare given to local communities by 2020, the Ministry of Forestry is giving out certificates like continuously, very fast. But personally, my concern is that it's too fast, because they don't prepare. There is no free prior informed consent process. So they think free prior informed consent is something to do when it impacts negatively, and they assume that social forestry is always positive. We are not so sure that social forestry is always positive. There is a lot that is very positive about it, and I really like it as a scheme, but there is also a lot that is not so positive, like it might be that the power shifts and still some people get landless because of that. So going in at this fast pace without proper analysis of what can happen if you do not do it correctly is a concern, at least for some, not general. So there have been other experiments with local communities. For example, you mentioned Halimun Salak earlier, Indonesian experience. But Halimun Salak was an interesting example because it was the leader of the natural park, the head of the natural park, in cooperation with NGOs, initiated this scheme without really the legal basis to do this. So he made a deal with a local city, a local city downhill, and said, you are using the water from our mountain, so it would be good if you pay some compensation. And so the city agreed, and they gave the park some money, but because of the legal structure, the park couldn't really use that money directly. It set up a consortium to use that money. So that is a scheme that has been initiated in a lot of national park really, to circumvent the unavailability of a legal framework. And now when it's working, the government is actually, especially some local governments, are trying to draft a policy to also regulate the PFAS, the environmental service compensation payment for people upstream. But as far as I know, only very few locations is actually working yet. And one of the main things is you have to be able to not give the service if they don't pay. And so if you can stop the water flow, then the people downstream will say, oh, the water is stopping, then we have to pay. But of course you cannot stop a river. So there has to be a mechanism in order to really ensure that the system is working. So that is the PFAS in Indonesia. The social forestry is ongoing, and it's still like a big trial. We don't really know what will happen. And REDD is also still a trial, but there's still no expectation that it will happen. I don't know when.
Vậy thì cái tính chủ động của cộng đồng dân cư khi mà họ thực hiện các cái chương trình RED cộng hay là PEST ở Indonesia thì được thể hiện như thế nào?
So that is the issue with social forestry, because according to law, all forest land belongs to the state, and people have no rights in it. So the social forestry tries to redress this unfairness, because a lot of people have been living there for generations. So they try to redress this unfairness by providing rights of use and rights of management for 35 years, and you can extend that later. For customary communities, actually the forest, the area of customary is taken out of the forest estate and then belongs to local communities. But so far it has not been explicitly linked to RED. We don't really know yet if you give social forestry to people, how will RED play out in social forestry. Also, social forestry is usually small areas, while RED is only going to be profitable if it's in a very large area and you can have, I don't know how many million tons of carbon sequestered or not emitted. So if you only look at the social forestry, it's still too little. We have officially 120 million hectare of forest, and of this 12.7 is now going to be given to communities, but often it's also the degraded part and the not so high carbon part. Then 50 or 60 million is big concessions. I think, I'm not sure, there are 50 national parks, and I think it also is 12 million hectare. So there is national park, but most of these national parks are degraded and encroached. So in order to have the REDD going to be effective, we need a lot more work on protecting what we have and improving what is degraded. So still a lot of work to do in Indonesia. So I don't know if social forestry will then be an asset or be a constraint to RED, because like the work in Vietnam in the PFAS, distributing little amounts of cash to a lot of people is actually very expensive. It is a high transaction cost. And so although they now say that there will not be any direct benefit in cash to local communities in REDD, still there will be some benefits. But what this constitute of is still in discussion. But I know that, for example, NORAD was saying there is going to be no direct cash benefits to local communities because it's too expensive, too high transaction cost.
Vâng, thưa bà là hiện nay thì dường như là cái tiếng nói của cộng đồng dân cư trong công tác quản lý bảo vệ rừng thì cũng đã được quốc tế ghi nhận rất là nhiều, đặc biệt là trong những cái hội nghị biến đổi khí hậu toàn cầu như là COP21 hay là COP23 vừa diễn ra tại Bonn. Vậy thì theo bà thì bây giờ chúng ta những cái nước đang phát triển có diện tích rừng lớn như là Việt Nam hay Indonesia thì chúng ta sẽ cần phải làm gì để đưa cái tiếng nói cộng đồng của dân cư, những cái tiếng nói mà thấp như vậy thì để đưa ra cộng đồng quốc tế để nhận thêm được nhiều cái sự hỗ trợ, cũng như là làm thế nào để chúng ta có thể thúc đẩy hơn được cái tiếng nói của cộng đồng dân cư này trên trường quốc tế ạ?
That is also an eternal question, because local people always feel left out and they don't have access to local governments, and local governments might go to the field but then only talk to the leaders. But there are efforts like civil society forum which try to link the voice of local people to the government, and if the local assemblies would do their job properly, they would often talk to the local people instead of wasting money by all kinds of other stuff. So and there should be a mechanism for local people to actually talk to the government. Of course, in Indonesia there is this whole planning system, yeah? There is planning at the village level, which goes to the sub-district, goes to the district, and then is sort of harmonized by I think it's district level, although they have just changed the law. I think it's in provincial level. But still, the way it's planned is not really thought through. And I think one of the big issues in all this country is that everything becomes very mechanistic. So instead of listening and understanding the complexity of local situation, they think that they can solve the problem in a technical manner, which doesn't work because people are not robots. So we need to understand the complexity at local level, the relationship of local people amongst themselves and with the resources, but also the relationship of local people with the local government. If the relation is well, there is often communication and the local government is willing to be more open, but that is very seldom the case. We can count cases in Indonesia, and I don't know about Vietnam, but if the district leader is after decentralization, for example, there were a few districts which had an ex-NGO person becoming district head, and during that short period in our history, there was suddenly an improvement in communication from local to government. But unfortunately then these were replaced by others, or they fell into corruption and things like that. So it didn't really last. But still, we have a few very good district heads which make international fame because they are open, they are innovative, and they are willing to listen. So that is, I think, what is needed, because our world is complex, our world is now uncertain, and so we cannot solve the problems in a mechanistic way.
Vâng, thưa bà, hiện nay thì trên thế giới cũng như là khu vực châu Á thì đã có rất nhiều các cái hoạt động của các cái liên minh của cộng đồng dân tộc thiểu số, trong đó thì cũng có nhiều các cái tổ chức xã hội dân sự đang hỗ trợ cũng như là thúc đẩy cái tiếng nói của cộng đồng dân cư để giúp cho họ có thể làm tốt các cái công tác của mình trong công tác quản lý bảo vệ rừng. Vậy thì bà có thể chia sẻ những cái hoạt động này đang diễn ra như thế nào?
So we are talking about civil society forums,
Yeah.
and how local people can get heard at the national and international level. I can give you an example of how forest land tenure is now moving in Indonesia, because in 1999 there was a new forestry law which really said that all forests belong to the state. And at that time, the customary communities who felt they had the right to the state started to unite and made a civil society forum. So from 1999 to 2010, nothing really much happened. But suddenly, now it's moving. Now their voices are heard. Now there is suddenly talk of recognizing local communities' rights to people. So this is an example of persistence, being consistent, and being united in a forum. And we call it civil society forum, but actually it's the customary community forum. So, and because they have been there for quite a while, and they have become a power, so now they are heard. So in our project, the ASEAN Social Forestry and Climate Change Project, we are working also together with a group called NTFPEP, the Non-Timber Forest Product Exchange Program. And their role in this project is promoting civil society forum in order that social forestry will be heard at the national level. So by maybe by chance, I don't know, or by design, next year's ISFCC meeting will be in Vietnam, because it's an ASEAN meeting, and it's run by the ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry. And so I think that NTFPEP wanted to hold a civil society forum also in Vietnam. But of course, it's not always possible in countries which have not a strong civil society organization. But that is one way, and we also talked about the COP, where civil society organizations also created a forum in order to be heard at the COP level. So these forums, sometimes we think it's too much, but actually if they're persistent enough, they might actually get a voice heard. But it takes it takes some time. You cannot create a forum for nothing within a year. You really have to build it up from local communities, from civil society. You really need to strengthen local communities, to empower them, and the state needs to enable this organization to work, yeah? Because if a state doesn't allow this by, it's like Indonesia just issued a policy which wanted to ban all mass organizations, for example, then it sort of puts a halt to that. Because there's mass organization and mass organization, not all are the same. But if you stop them all, then you also kill all these small initiatives. So it needs empowerment at local level, it needs the state enabling them, and it needs some communication channels to other similar groups, because it's basically a learning process.
Vâng, xin cảm ơn bà Mora Moliono đã chia sẻ những cái câu chuyện rất là thú vị về các cái cộng đồng đang quản lý và bảo vệ rừng trong khu vực châu Á cũng như là trên thế giới. Xin cảm ơn những chia sẻ của bà. Vâng, thưa quý vị và các bạn, với việc công nhận cộng đồng dân cư là chủ rừng, điều này có nghĩa là sẽ giúp cho cộng đồng dân cư sẽ có thêm quyền cũng như là có thêm tiếng nói tốt hơn để làm tốt công việc quản lý và bảo vệ rừng của mình. Chương trình Vấn đề môi trường của chúng tôi ngày hôm nay xin được khép lại tại đây. Xin kính chào và hẹn gặp lại quý vị trong những chương trình tiếp theo.